Okay, today we're going to kind of review over the Minister's Black Veil and Sinners at the Hands of an Angry God, the tutorial assessment that we have. When we get done, or when you get done with this, what I want you to do is go back to your Google Classroom and go ahead and take the assessment for the stories. So let's start with Sinners at the Hands of an Angry God and look at some of the questions that will be on there and what we're looking at as far as the kind of information we need to be pulling out of the story. As far as the sermon goes, a sermon is a speech given by a clergyman or a man of high ranking to a congregation or to an audience. And the idea of the sermon that John basically gives to his congregation is people are in terrible danger of the anger of God's wrath because they don't understand just how angry he is. And to be honest, there's nothing people can do to save themselves from the terrible punishments that await sinners. And that was his point, is that we are all sinners and that there's no way to avoid that punishment, which is a very powerful message. The main purpose in him writing this sermon is to establish the glorification and the praise of God himself. He wants to have people become more respectful, more aware of the power that God has for his people. And according to Edwards, the gentleman who is giving the sermon, the only way people can protect themselves from hell, the only way, is through virtuous behavior. It doesn't even matter if you do good works. Good works are nothing if there's not virtue behind it, like there's not a motivation to be selfless. So people may do good works just to get themselves into heaven, kind of like buying your way to heaven. But the bottom line is virtuous behavior is the key. According to Edwards, God's attitude towards us, the people, to sinners is ruthless. He doesn't like us. He's angry. The only way, according to Edwards, that God's attitude towards the person living a good life is that he will be merciful if you live a virtuous, good life. The emotion that God Edwards emphasizes the most in the sermon is anger. After all, the name of the story is Sinners at the Hands of an Angry God. So anger is the key term here. Moving on to the Minister's Black Veil, it is a parable, which is different than a sermon. As I said, a sermon is what a person gives to a congregation. A parable is a story told that gives a moral lesson that we want to take away from. So within the story is a point that they're trying to give to whoever is reading or listening to. And in the Minister's Black Veil, the parishioners have a very intense response to seeing the minister's veil. They're frightened by it. Imagine if you go to church and the minister or the priest or the speaker comes out with a horrendous, scary-looking mask and refuses to take it off, and it's the point that they're trying to make. It's a powerful statement, and most people who would see that would be frightened by it. And that's what his congregation is frightened by, the people there at the church. What we can infer about the beliefs of the minister's congregation, this is what we can kind of assume about them based on how they talk, how they work, how they live their lives, or their thought process about their ministers. They ignore God for the most part. They go and they live their lives and they do what they do, but they ignore God in the literal sense. One of the meanings of Mr. Hooper's veil, because it is a metaphor, if you will, about sin. And the relationships between people is that, for instance, the relationship between him and Elizabeth is as far as that when she asks him to remove the veil, she becomes angry with him for wearing the veil in the first place. She doesn't try to understand or try to recognize or respect her partner's decision or the point that he's trying to make. So she is angered by the fact that he won't remove it for her. The Puritan attitude during that time about human nature is they were pessimists. They're very pessimistic. To be pessimist means you look on the negative side of things all the time, not the positive. That's an optimist. And so they are very pessimistic people. So they're always fighting with each other and always looking at the negatives in each other and in life. When Mr. Hooper gets ill at the very end of the story, the ironic aspect is that the person who ends up taking care of him isn't his congregation, isn't a doctor, isn't the ministry. It is Elizabeth, the one woman who left him at the very beginning. A moral lesson that can be kind of pulled away from this is that guilty secrets separate us from who we are and separate us from one another. A social lesson, okay, this is a lesson that we can learn about society in the story, is that most people protect their privacy by wearing personal masks. And we're not talking about a mask that they physically wear. It is a mask that we wear every day, whether we are upset or unhappy, but then we put on a happy face for others. If we've committed some sort of crime or sin against another person, it can look them in the face and smile and act like nothing happened. These are the masks that we're talking about that people wear. For members of his church, when they first see the veil, and quote, an unsought pathos came hand in hand with awe. How did the people feel about him? Well, honestly, they thought the veil was simply awful. They thought it was a horrible emblem because it was black and it covered his face. But at the same time, they could see through the black. They could see the contours of his face, but they couldn't see his face directly. And that was very frightening to them. Over what group does the minister seem to have the most power? The most power that he possesses is over his congregation, the people who go to church and follow in what he preaches. Which statement expresses a central theme to the story? Well, basically, faith can overcome any hardship. He wore this mask as a sign of penance throughout the entirety of his life once he put it on, and was not to be removed even in death. For his sins were his own personal sins, and he was trying to make up for them by wearing this mask in public, trying to prove a point to the people who saw him. And what was his sins? I don't know, and nobody knows. It was never stated, but the point was that he was suffering for it. And he suffered because although people began to respect him and see him as a venerable man, a very religious, devout man, they were still frightened by him because of the mask that he wore. They were still frightened by the sins that he had committed. That mask represented them. And it opened up an idea in themselves that they themselves had something to hide, but at the same time, they were not willing to come out and admit it. The message about human nature that is conveyed most strongly when dealing with Elizabeth and nursing him back to on his deathbed, the message that we could be said is that despite what a person does, despite how a person acts, love for someone can endure. So even though she left him and she couldn't handle being around the fact that he wore this mask with her, she still loved him and respected him and took care of him in his hour of need, which is a powerful message. Another message that might be conveyed basically by the minister at the wedding when he is doing the wedding vows is what he tries to tell the couple when they get married is secrets between people can destroy trust and love in relationships. So people who get married need to understand that if they keep secrets from their partner and they don't stick to truth, if they don't stick to honesty, then that will corrode and destroy the trust and love that they have for one another in their relationship. And ultimately, what does the veil represent? It represents sin. That's the metaphor. It is secret sin that we have that veil conveys. All right, that's it. Good luck, and take your assessment.